I'd like to kick off with the concrete introduction to SSFN. And I think we've noticed in the past that one of the key questions that's always been asked us is, what is it about exactly? And SSFN is about the exchange of data via external networks. So what we have today, and most of you are SIG participants, so of course you know your application very well. But if you want to communicate with that application with SIGs, then obviously you first go through your internal network, and then you have to go over an external network. We've got principally two options. One of them is the indirect connection, where you use the services of a telecommunications company, or in some minor cases, there's also the possibility of having a direct connection, which is typically named like a dark fiber or something like that. But I think this is very important, that what we're talking about does not happen on application level. It happens actually on the external network level, and that's the background of also the Secure Swiss Finance Network. Now, taking this a bit deeper, if we look at today's situation, how do then various participants connect actually to SIGs for the usage of various applications such as SIG, but also SECOM or debit card or ATM or e-bill and the like. And we've got 4 different variations how this works. For SIG, as you know, the 2 access paths are either via SWIFT or then alternatively via Finance IPnet. If you come via Finance IPnet, then there are 2 sub-options. The one is you come in directly with your own Finance IPnet connection, or then you have a service provider which will do the service for you. Again, here, I'd just like to take this point up again, as this either way is really the external network. So it actually then is completely independent of the actual service the one is using. So also associated security service, such as SAS or HSM, as most of you know, are linked together with the application itself, with the service itself, are not with the external network that you use. The reason why I'm saying this is that, and we'll see this later on again, when we change over to SSFN from Finance IPnet, SAS and HSM, they stay exactly the same. What I'd also like to mention here is that maybe something which is maybe not so well known, and we've also seen that in the questions that we asked and the answer we received. If you've got a Finance IPnet connection, you can actually use that for any other or most other services that SIGs provides. However, of course, a number of SIG services are also available via the internet as an external network. And something that we've also seen, that mostly participants, SIG participants, and also other SIGs clients, they will have a combination of external networks that they use. So they might have a number of Finance IPnet connections, one for SIG, one for other services, and the third service they take from SIGs might actually also come via the internet. So we have seen that there are quite some historical reasons for that. Now, I'd like to go in a bit more into Finance IPnet, which was introduced in 2003. So it's actually got a couple of years on its back, but it's still extremely safe. But one of the things is that, of course, we're always looking into things. Is it still the right thing? Is it still good? Because we want to proactively be in charge of any kind of change and not have to react to developments which then suddenly overtake us, which is always also the reason why we started looking into design technology. We identified this technology some 2 or 3 years ago. It had already been in use at some of the banks and also at the Swiss National Bank. And with the experience we'd seen there, we thought, well, this could really be a good solution, so that we don't just it's not just one party or two parties looking into this. We set up a broad project with many participants, 6. The Swiss National Bank. We also brought in Anapaya, the commercial science technology provider, a spin-off from the ETH Zurich. We brought in obviously also the big telcos in Switzerland, and of course also partner banks. So we really get the full spectrum of views here. And together we launched the project. We actively worked together. We set up a pilot work. We did intensive testing of this pilot work. Fritz will afterwards go into a bit of more details what we tested, but I think the results here were really convincing. We also looked into how we can define governance of the new network, and especially we also looked into use cases. And I think the reason why I want to point this out is that we don't just want to have a one-for-one exchange, but we want to see that we can really augment services which can be used, which is why the use cases we identified are not only the ones that one could use today with Finance IPNet, but we also saw that, yes, with a secure Swiss Finance Network, this network can also be used as a secure connection between banks. And last but not least, we also looked into further possibilities of the science technology as such, and actually also identified use cases and partially also tested them for example, working from home through a science-based network, which works very, very well. So all these things considered, we decided together, yes, the science technology is good. Yes, SSFN is the technology to be, is the new network to be, which is why the Secure Swiss Finance Network will go live in November this year, and it shall also replace Finance IPNet in the midterm, just simply because it has a superior flexibility. It's far more resilient, and the functionality is significantly better than Finance IPNet. With this short introduction to the subject, I would now like to hand over to Sebastian Krenzin of the Swiss National Bank. Sebastian? I have a feeling Sebastian Krenzin is having some slight technical issues. This can happen when one uses external networks. So therefore, I would suggest then I would hand over to Fritz, who would, in your place, take over so that we can continue with this live presentation.
All right. Can you skip to the actual technical introduction, because I don't want to take over the S&B part. Just give me the opportunity to give you some insight into how the SSFN actually looks like from the technical side. So SSFN is based actually on Cyan, and we will look into this in a deeper fashion. But first, let's look into Finance IPNet, how this is actually working right now. Finance IPNet has some big advantages over using the traditional internet, what you would probably use for everyday connectivity purposes. Finance IPNet is a separate network from the internet, and it's built on various carriers, so various telecom companies that provide the network between the customer and SIX as a central hub. So each customer decides on how he wants to connect to SIX using his applications and his connectivity, and he would then communicate over these links to SIX and to SIX only. So it's a what we call hub and spoke network, where the spokes would be the customers and the hub would be SIX. This is perfectly fine for centrally hosted applications and services such as SIC, and it's perfectly secure as well. Once it's set up, there is no means of crossing over from this network to internet or vice versa, and it has been proven technology for the last 20 years. So it's really secure, but it lacks a bit of flexibility. Think about setting up connections, especially for long-haul distance connectivity. This becomes rapidly very complicated and very complex and time-consuming. You can also choose just from the 3 service providers that we set up the network with, and there is no easy introduction of new service providers to that network. So it's always a bit limited, and it doesn't allow any to-any communication between the participants either. So if customer A wanted to speak to customer B, then it couldn't be done via finance IPNet. On the other hand, it might be tempting to actually use the internet as communication means, as many applications do already today. However, this is not really what we want to, where we want to go to, especially for critical application connectivity, such as for SIG or for SECOM or the other aforementioned services. Internet, of course, is flexible, but it's always prone to risks and to attacks that come from it. So therefore, we did not want to go down that route. So what is it then? Next slide, please. What is it then that SSFN actually is differing in terms of how the network now looks like that we built? You see on this slide, again, a Slido QR code. So please go into Slido again, and there's an active poll right now. If you could fill in that poll, we will get to it later on at the end of this slide. As Christopher already mentioned, the SSFN, the Swiss Secure Finance Network, is based on Cyan technology, which was developed by ETH. And this brings a number of advantages over using pure internet with it. It's, first of all, protected against cyber risks. So the risks that we see coming from internet attacks are the network there is immune, not just because it's separate from the internet, separately built, but inherently by using specific mechanisms to prevent those risks from actually happening. The any-to-any connectivity that I mentioned, which is not possible on finance IPNet, can be done. So if customers would want to exchange data over this network, rather than using a separate network or using the internet, it could be done by using SSFN. The technology is new, although very well tested and very well proven also. We will see that later on. In our context, it is resilient, it is sustainable. We can reuse the same connectivity for other means as well, not just for the Swiss Secure Finance Network, but also for any kind of other protection network using the same links and making multiple usage of the same network. We have a higher resilience against path interruptions because we will see that later on. We have here a network which offers failover, seamless failover even between the telco providers and also the various links that go from the participants to the telco providers. If I go on the image to the left, actually you see how it's built. We have the aforementioned telco providers, Switch, Swisscom, and Sunrise in the middle of the network. They are redundantly interconnected with each other. We have SIX and the Swiss National Bank connecting to all 3 of them. And we have the customers then individually connecting to those who are service providers for themselves as well. We will see that then in the next slide, how this looks like. But in the meantime, we want to see how the poll actually looked like. So if you can switch to Slido, the question was, is your relevant data center located in Switzerland or outside? I can't see any results right now. I think there's at least 22 participants now. They're going, okay. So the majority here is Switzerland and 18% are outside Switzerland. And maybe let me just mention here, although it's called Swiss Secure Finance Network, it's not limited to geographical Switzerland. We can, of course, also hook up data centers that are outside of Switzerland. So how does it look like from a resilience perspective? What I'm going to show you here is more or less the same picture as before, but now with the focus on the network service providers, so the telcos in the middle, and with the clients using that network. What is the goal? I mean, it's not a terribly complex network that we set up right now, but just to illustrate on how it works and what the benefit is in using that, I want to show you a concrete use case. We have the goal of client 1 accessing any service from client 3 to the right via the shortest available path that goes through the network. Probably this would be through the network service provider 1, because both of them are hooked up to this one and they have a direct interconnection through this network service provider. Obviously, there would be different paths as well. You could think of using the client 1 going through network service provider 2, and then over to network service provider 3, and then just reaching client 3. This actually will happen if we start to interfere with the network or if something breaks. So let's say we have a problem with this router on client A, so on client 1 actually. The one that provided the connectivity over to client 3 is now broken, and immediately the path will fail over to network service provider 2 and then go, let's say, through NSP1 over to client 3. That said, you could actually do the same on internet, of course. You might say, yeah, well, this is not so much different. You can't do the same on Finance IPNet though. The difference in Finance IPNet is if your network service provider breaks, then you must fail over and break the session so that you can hook up to your connection to network service provider 2. That's a big disadvantage. In the internet, it would work this way as indicated here, but the failover would take probably somewhere between 10 to 15 seconds, something like that. Whereas in Cyan, this failover actually literally takes milliseconds. We were not able to really measure it completely, but it's no more than a few milliseconds doing no harm to the session. We can wreak havoc more on the network, and now something really awfully happens. Network service provider 1 completely goes off the map. Obviously, the connectivity that we had before is now gone, as well as the links coming out of network service provider 1, they're all gone. And so we have a further failover to network service provider 3, and the path is still available. The only thing that remains to be broken and can break so that but we would still have an available path would be the interconnection between network service provider 2 and 3. And obviously all the other links are gone too. And we can also take down some of the services that are required to run the network, such as the certificate authority in client 3, the certificate and a couple of servers in network service provider 2 and 3, and we would still retain the connection. We have done these kinds of harm to the network extensively throughout the pilot phase and on the pilot network. And we have seen that amazingly, even though we had almost nothing left anymore within the network, the connectivity was still present, and the session, so the SIG session in that regard, was not even touched. The application did not even notice that so many things happened and so many things broke. In comparison to what we have on Finance IPNet, this would more or less mean we have an interrupt of at least 4 minutes within the application. This is not just coming from the network, of course. This is also how the application is behaving in case of outages. Typically, a reestablishment of the session has to happen, and then also reconciliation has to be done in order to find out where the last successful transaction was and how good it is, and possibly a catch up on transactions as well. So although we're talking purely about network today, it's important for application resilience as well. And if we go into more real-time fashion types of transactions and traffic, the more important it becomes that the network itself will remain resilient. Further on the governance actually of this network, if we go on slide ahead, then we see that the network is based on standard services. You can go now out to telco providers and find their offerings on their homepages. They will build a sign connection to you provided by your preferred telco company. And on top of that, we will have these routers that you've seen in the previous slide. We will have these gateways there. They are provided by a hardware and software provider, for instance, Anapaya. On top of it, so this is the basis for any sign connectivity. On top of it, you then get a SSFN certificate, which makes you actually an active member of SSFN, an active user. This is the distinction between any other SIAN network and SSFN. And this is actually governed by the SSFN governance, which we will see later on in the presentation. And the whole thing, everything there, makes up what we know as SSFN. So this concludes actually my part. I believe I'll hand over to Christopher again. I hope we have Sebastian now in the call.
Thank you, Fritz. I will now allow myself to quickly go back to Sebastian's slide and show and hand over to Sebastian. I'd just like to take a quick moment to say slides will be distributed at the end because this was a question, and a second question was posed, and I believe this will be answered now by Sebastian. So Sebastian, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much, Christopher. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. So we just showed how important communication is. And I would also like to welcome you warmly on behalf of the Swiss National Bank to today's webinar on SSFN. SSFN, as you have heard now from Christopher and also from Fritz, is a very important project, and it's important to bring communication on a new level and improve the resilience in communication, because it's important not to stay in the status quo, even though we do see that Finance IPNet is a very secure way of communication, but nevertheless, we have identified that with SSFN, we have even a better solution. And what you see in the blue box is the vision, which we have identified together with the SIX. And the vision is to establish a secure Swiss finance network, which is secure, as the title already mentions, but also flexible, resilient, and future-proof. And I will now also evaluate or enter into these four elements. One is the secure. The secure is really that you increase communication, you make it more resilient, and that you are more resilient with respect to attacks from outside, and not being countermined when you come with the communication, so that you don't have any disruption, or that you're prevented as a financial institution to communicate, for instance, with the payment system. The other element is the flexibility, and Fritz has already showed that flexibility, we will improve the flexibility compared to the current solution. So in the future, it will be possible to communicate not only with the financial market infrastructure, but also between all financial institutions which are in this isolation domain. So that will bring it also to a new level. And the third element, the resilience, is, in my view, a very important aspect. So communication with the financial market infrastructure must function at all times. And the current solution which we have, and Fritz mentioned it, you do have a session interruption. And with the SSFN, in the future, this will not be the case anymore. And this is thanks to the collaboration which the carriers have entered. So you have an automatic failover. And this is, in our view, a very important development because we are also introducing instant payment in SIG. So in the future, there will be transactions which have to be settled within 5 seconds or 5 to 10 seconds. So you cannot have an interruption of 3 or 2 to 4 minutes. So it's important to have a communication infrastructure which is resilient, but also in a sense ready at all times and allows the communication at all times without interruption. So that's a very important aspect which we have identified is important, especially to be also fit for the future. And the fourth element is the future-proofness. So what we have seen is that it is important that not only the communication with the RTGS, so the SIG, is based on SSFN, but also that other financial market infrastructures can be based on the communication with SSFN. So in the end, you have some synergies here. And we have also entered into a dialogue already for more than 1 year with the Swiss government, which is also evaluating this technology and also evaluating to what extent data communication between cantons and the government could be set on a very similar concept. So it wouldn't be SSFN, but it will be something very similar. Here we have 2 examples, SS Health N, so that would be a SSHN, or an administration, so that would be the university communication, which would then be based on also on the same concept. So as you can see, it's really a future-proof and communication, a way of communication which improves communication compared to the current solution. On the next slide, I would also like to quickly elaborate on the so-called endpoint security requirements. I hope you can already see the next slide.
Yes.
Okay, great. So the financial system is only as strong as its weakest link. So it's really important to address the whole payment value chain and to improve the requirements or to increase the requirements on all the various levels. So based on the past experience in other countries, several authorities and also international bodies have defined or are about to define minimum standards for market participants. So that would be that you have certain requirements on accessibility, on network infrastructure. And one element is, of course, also the communication, because communication is important, communication to the RTGS, so in this sense, to the SIG system. You see virtually two ways how to communicate, and Christopher and Fritz have already elaborated on it. There are 2 ways how you can communicate with the RTGS system. The participant A, which you see here, of course, you have the value chain from the customer to back office, but then actually you have let's say the processing, and then the communication goes via the service provider to the RTGS. So that would be like an indirect communication. The transmission of the message goes via the service provider. The other way would be that a participant directly communicates with the RTGS. That would be, for instance, participant B. So they would have a direct connectivity. And for us, it's important that the whole value chain is secure, which means that SSFN in a first step will be introduced for participant B. So that will be that direct communication. And it would also be introduced for the service provider to the RTGS. And in a second step, we will also have a requirement that participant A, when it communicates with the service provider, will also have to improve its communication infrastructure and move towards SSFN. So in the end, with the endpoint security requirements, we aim to increase the resilience of the whole value chain and not only just the direct communication between the RTGS and the service provider or participant B. So this is a very important element which I just wanted to highlight at this stage. Then on the next slide, and you have also already heard with the governance framework. So SSFN is a joint effort. For us, it's important that we ensure that the payment system remains efficient, fast, secure, and future-proof. And we also see that SSFN is a contribution by the Swiss National Bank to the sector-wide efforts to increase the resilience of the Swiss financial sector against cyber risks. We also have SIX, which is a very important participant in the financial market system. They are the operator of the critical market infrastructures. And as I mentioned, it's important that not only the communication is based, that SSFN is introduced for the communication with the RTGS, but also with other infrastructure elements which are, or services which are provided by SIX. And as Fritz also already mentioned, SIX is product owner of the SSFN and eventually sets the standards and makes the necessary rules so that we really have a smooth functioning of the SSFN. We also had a roundtable about, I would say 3 to 4 months ago, where a roundtable with the pilot banks and also with the carriers, and also raised the issue if they saw that there are future areas of application. And it was very interesting to see that it's not just an application which is valuable for the RTGS, but that it also allows banks, for instance, to use this technology to communicate with its branches, be it now in Switzerland or abroad, but also, for instance, to have a communication of the clients to the bank's application. So an example would be e-banking. But what has also been mentioned is that you could, and this is something very timely, is the home office, that you could use this technology to increase the resilience and the security of communication via the internet with this SIAN-based network, and eventually also have a solution for the future. So in that sense, it's not just an application which you could use for the financial market infrastructures, but also in various other ways. What we also find very worth mentioning is that the carriers have recognized the opportunities and now are cooperating, and exactly this cooperation is an answer to the cyber risks and an answer to increasing the resilience of communication. Thanks to this collaboration or cooperation, the failover will be in milliseconds compared to a failover which we currently have of about 4 minutes if you go from one finance IPnet line to the other. So with that cooperation, we have, of course, a new level. We reach a new level. And last but not least, I think we can also be proud that ETH Zurich has developed this technology, and that we now have a technology which could really be used also abroad. And with Anapaya system, we now have also a spin-off which ensures the operational implementation and readiness. So in that sense, I would like to close with the last slide. We have already heard from Christopher the various elements, the 4 elements, the ways how you can communicate with the RTGS. And I think here I would highlight the dark gray boxes. So as I mentioned before, the requirement will be that direct participants, and we have about 25 banks which directly communicate with the RTGS, that they implement the SSFN connectivity. I also mentioned that we expect service providers to establish the connectivity to the RTGS via SSFN. And in a second step, we will then also, with the endpoint security requirements, we will also define that banks which enter their payments via service providers, that also this communication will be based in the future on SSFN, so that we really cover the whole value and payment chain and that it is covered with the SSFN communication layer. So with that, I would like to close my part, and I would say I would pass on to Thomas Reske. He is the project manager of SSFN and also a key person now to ensure readiness so that we can establish SSFN as a new standard for the RTGS.
Thank you, Sebastian. Good morning. So I hope everyone can hear me. Yeah. So as we learned from Sebastian, communication is all. Communication is important. Communication is nothing without any rules. So I'd like to give you a very short overview what we are planning, what we will implement on the governance side of SSFN. As Christopher mentioned, Finance IPnet was introduced in 2003. It's still stable and reliable from the beginning on, but the rules were more or less informal. So what we are planning now is to define and to implement rules and regulations from the beginning on. And there we have also to stick to the main goals: security, flexibility, resilience, and future-proof. And of course, the key player has to have control to the network. How can we reach these goals? We need clear rules who can participate on the network. We need clear rules. What are the rights and obligations of all the involved parties, and we need guidelines how to further develop the SSFN to meet the future requirements. Which is very important. So the governance of SSFN is split in two parts. It's there are the voting members, 6 SMB and Switch. The voting members are the organizational core of SSFN. They're responsible for setting the basic rules, which are defined in the TRC, in the trust root configuration, which is the backbone of SSFN. They are all governance rules implemented in. And then we have the service providers, which are responsible for operating SSFN and which have to assure that we do have a very reliable network without any failures. And of course, we have the users which are offering services to the providers, and there are the banks which are using the services. And who can you be part of SSFN? It's quite easily. Whenever you are using a service from SIX, then you're qualified to be part of the network, especially for those who are using now Finance IPnet. And of course, we still have the service bureaus, which are very important for connectivity to SIG, for example, and they will, of course, also participate to the network. Go to next slide, please. So, how can we assure a future proof of SSFN? How we can further development it? And quite simple rules. Everyone, every member, every party can make change requests to SSFN, and these change requests will be assessed by the voting members, which is 6 SMB and Switch. And after assessment of the change request, we will use all the parties for consultation of these change requests. And after these consultation, we will make a decision whether to implement the change requests or not. And then, it will go to productivity. And we have 3 committees. We have the SSFN user forum, where all parties are invited to participate. We have the SIGN Operation Forum, where all the service providers are in to guarantee a smooth operating of SSFN. And we have the body of the 3 voting members, which will have regular meetings chaired by 6. Thank you. I hand over to Christopher.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for that explanation on the governance. And now I'd like to go into a bit more details as to how do you now, what do you need to do? How do you actually connect to SSFN? I'd just like to show this slide again, which Sebastian Krenzlin already showed, just to remind you which parties need to set up an SSFN connection. As you can also see on the slide, I put in the Slido symbol with a question. While I'm explaining this slide, it'd be great if you could look at that and maybe also answer the question. So as you can see, and as Sebastian mentioned, in a first step, of course, those parties with a direct connection, i.e. number 3, are required to set up an SSFN connection. The service bureaus, the service providers, which Thomas also just mentioned, they are also required to set up a SSFN connection. And then in the second step, also those SIG and EuroSIG participants which connect via a service provider will then also need a SSFN connection. The question I asked, or we asked in Slido, was when does your institute plan to connect to SSFN? Have you already got any plans? And if yes, when do you think that we will start connecting to SSFN? And I think if I look at the results, which are slowly coming in, it seems to me as if most participants here have not yet made any concrete plans. However, we do have 1 or 2 which obviously are thinking on doing this in the very near future. I think this is very encouraging. I'll just go in a bit further then why I think this is encouraging. So I think maybe if we'd ask this question after the next slide, it might be slightly different, because here I'd really like to show you what are actually the required steps how to get to a SSFN connection. You can basically there are 5 basic steps. So the first step is, as always, is an analysis, which we recommend that you do an analysis as to how what your current connection situation is. Do you just use your Finance IPNet connection for SIG? Do you also, or do you have do you also use other services of SIGs which could be used via SSFN? Do you also have, this was also one of the questions we asked in advance, do you also have connections to other banks? And quite a number of the answers said yes, we do have connections to other banks, either with a leased line or via the internet. So these are all things that are intelligently looked at, so that you can then define how would you like to actually have your SSFN connection set up, where should it be located, which services should go through that, what sort of connections would you like to have there. Then once you've got your basic plan, then we can start obtaining the SIGN connection itself from the carriers. And of course also your gateways, start installing the gateways, get it all ready. Once you're all ready, then you can come to SIGs and apply for the SSFN certificate. Why wait for the certificate here? Certificates in any SIAN-based network are short-lived, so that's why it's prudent to wait until you're fully set up, and then to be able to then get your initial certificate and then install it right away, so that then afterwards the automatic renewal process can be started. Otherwise, you have to get the initial certificate multiple times. Once you got it, you set it up, then the usual testing phase starts. And once you've done the test and you're satisfied with the test results, then you can go over to step 4. I start using SSFN, probably starting with EuroSIG and then going on to SIG itself. And then in the 5th step, once you've also gained more confidence and more experience with this new type, then step by step adding on further services which use SSFN, maybe even connections to other parties via SSFN. Couple of remarks I'd like to make here. As you can see, most of these tasks which are to be performed require a deep network competence. So, and I think this is also important from a resource perspective. It's not actually the application specialists which will be involved very heavily here, but it's really the network specialists which will have the main workload to be performed here. The application specialists will actually come most probably only in a 2nd step, when we're actually connecting individual services via SSFN, where they provide the necessary input. What I'd also like to say is that when you're thinking about your connections, bear in mind that if you're using SIG, we will require a dual carrier strategy to really also be able to profit from the resilience that Fritz showed. This failover, obviously, that will only work as shown if you have connections to more than one carrier. Otherwise, obviously, that is not a given. I think also, and this is really also the question that I just asked beforehand, we would suggest that you start planning for your SSFN setup now, early on. While we do, from experience, think that it'll take on average somewhere between 3 and 6 months. I think it would still be prudent to start planning now, just because especially the 1st step on the left-hand side, the planning, that might take quite a while, and also the probably at most institutes the knowledge on the actual technology, which SIAN technology on which it is based, is maybe not the greatest, which is also why we suggest that you also take in your service providers of choice, be that either one of the 3 carriers or be it Anapaya, so that you can really be supported there in setting up the optimal situation at your institute. And I think another very important thing is this is not a big bang solution. So each institute can install its own SSFN connection, and we also suggest that you then also keep on your existing connection until such a time when it can be turned off, especially also as a fallback solution should, for whatever reasons, the connection break, just so that we really gain here, everybody gains confidence. Having said this, I think we have more or less covered, hopefully, all topics. So we're actually already now slowly moving on to the outlook, to the wrap up, and especially the questions and discussions. So let me quickly reiterate some points that we made today. SSFN will go live as of November, and it will replace Finance IPNet in the midterm. This was a joint project by many parties. We brought in quite a few parties here to the table to really create a solution which we think is really beneficial to the financial market as a whole. And I think also a very important aspect here is that with this we can really have a very good technology which helps us get the solution that we would like. As also mentioned, SSFN is not just a simple one-for-one exchange for Finance IPNet, but it can actually be used for far more. Not just, as I said, connecting to 6 and using 6 services, but it can also you can also use it to connect to other parties connected by 6 connected here to exchange data. Which is why also we suggest that you really have a dual carrier strategy, dual connections, just to also get the full benefits out of this network. And the last point I'd also like to mention, which Sebastian also mentioned here, the science technology can also be used for very interesting use cases like the working from home to increase also there the connection. So as a final sort of like call for action, if you so want, we do encourage you to start planning now, and we also encourage you to get the support of the service providers, of the SSFN service providers, to help you here setting this up in the most beneficial way for you, because at the end of the day, each institute is individual, has got its own situations. There's not just one size fits all, but each institute needs to find its own optimal setup, which is why the SSFN service providers can help you here finding the best solution for your institute. With that, I would like to go on to the next session, to the Q&A session, and I invite you to ask questions. State them in the chat, in the live event chat, your Q&A, so then we can answer that. 2 questions were already there. I'd like to answer them directly myself. Will we get the slides at the end? Yes, we will send out the slides next week. That is planned. The second question was in respect to will Finance IPNet or will SSFN also replace Swift-based connections? I think there, as it was nicely shown by Sebastian, there it is primarily for the Finance IPNet connections, but of course there's always changes like this are always opportunities to look into new solutions. One further question which I can see here will also come in, a more technical question which I will then hand over to Fritz. And the question here was, is a parallel operation between Finance IPNet and SSFN possible? How does such a parallel operation work? Fritz?
Yes, a parallel operation is possible and desirable, at least for the upcoming future, until you feel comfortable with using SSFN as primary network on your side, and of course also until the last of the services has been migrated over and made available on SSFN. Your network specialists will tell you that there is a possibility to either route services via SSFN primarily, or then use Finance IPNet as a fallback. It can be done either automatically with a certain failover time, and then obviously sessions will break during that failover because it's a completely different network. Or then you can choose also to actually perform that failover manually if you wish to control the switchover from your point of view. But yes, it is encouraged to actually not just tear down Finance IP once you've moved over to SSFN, at least for the time being.
Thank you, Fritz. Another question that was asked in regards more timeline. Has already an end date be defined for Finance IPNet? The answer there is a clear no. It has not yet been defined. We will first introduce SSFN, but we are in the process of defining an end date because obviously a long parallel situation of both networks is not in the best of interests. So there we are working on a end date, but I think I'd like to compare it to other situations where we would like to first introduce the new service with the aim to replace the old service, and when we once it's gone live, that we then decide and communicate about the decommissioning date of the older service. One further question was asked in respect to SIG participants which connect through the internet with the service bureau, and do such institutes need to implement anything, need to change anything? I'd like to reiterate here what Sebastian said in regards to endpoint security. So the whole chain is only as strong as the weakest link, which is why, as Sebastian showed, the Swiss National Bank plans to introduce also here the requirement to connect between the SIG participant and its service bureau via SSFN. Or to answer the question very briefly and shortly, yes, you will need to implement not something but SSFN. The next question is a more technical question, which I would like to then hand over to Fritz. And it is asking if SIG will provide architecture blueprints for the different usages, especially between direct and service bureaus.
So yes, the answer is also yes, we will provide blueprints. We have already developed quite a number of blueprints together with the pilot participants. And we had 5 pilot participants, and guess what? We had 5 different solutions that we ended up with. But we think that one or the other might just fit for your purpose. So please approach us, and we will get into the discussion on see what fits best. There are you know, a number of dependencies on how your internal network looks like, how spread your data centers are, how they're interconnected, and so on and so forth. But yes, we have a good view now what's out there, and we can help you out. So please get in touch with us.
Thank you, Fritz. The next question is about the relation between SSFN and SIG5. If possible, Sebastian Krenzin, I would like to hand this question over to you. So as I'm just going to repeat the question, Sebastian. The question is, what is the relation between SSFN and SIG5?
So I hope you can hear me. Is it good?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So virtually, there's no direct relation in the sense that we already introduced SSFN for SIG4, but what we do see is that it's an important element for SIG5, because SIG5 will introduce time-critical payments, so instant payments, and hence the connectivity and the communication with the RTGS needs to be allowed at all times and ensured, and hence for SIG5 it will be play an even more important role, but it will already play an important role for SIG4.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for that. A further question is in regards to repo trading, which I'd like to hand over to Fritz. So the question here is, will repo trading or core connectivity also be available through SSFN?
Well, the answer is not from the beginning. We have repo trading currently on a completely separate network from the exchange because there's different requirements to do trading, although repo is not really, latency critical, but still it is on the different network. And we're working together with all parties to move that or make that available also via SSFN, but it's not going to be available from day one. This is one of the services that we will then make available later on, but it will definitely become available eventually, not from day one.
Thank you, Fritz. I'd like to ask one more or answer one more question, which was also posed in advance. It has to do, and I'd like to give this also over to you, Fritz. The question there is, what are the implementation requirements?
There's a couple of requirements that there are none of them on the application level, because we're exchanging purely the transport, and in transport there's the requirements to set up all these connections and routers and stuff like that we mentioned before. Of course, there's a close interaction between application engineers and network engineers is required as well, because you will want to test, you will want to do one thing at a time, and therefore also an interaction with us is probably required. You will have to change firewall rules, stuff like that, but nothing on the application side, at least not in the first place. Maybe the applications will get benefits eventually by changing, but only after the adoption of SSFN.
Thank you, Fritz. Even though I think I can hand the next question over again to you, Fritz, it's about the SSFN technology. And the other question is this SSFN technology becoming a standard outside Switzerland as well? And are there similar initiatives abroad?
So the answer is, in academia, it's very well known already internationally. There are a couple of universities working on standardization of SSFN as such. It has gained some traction in other projects as well internationally. However, we have not heard of any financial sector initiative so far. And we think we are a lighthouse project in that regard. We very much hope that we will see more adoption of this. And maybe let me also take the look of a telco provider. Right now, as we have shown you, we have the 3 telco providers present within the network. Of course, there is no limitation or any hurdle that other telco providers could also join the SSFN network, so that we could provide this network and of course SSFN also to other providers internationally. This is possible and desired. However, we believe that first the market needs to be established, and therefore maybe it's not going to be happening, just in the short term.
Thank you, Fritz. I would like to add here that we do know that a number of telcos, network service providers in Western Europe are looking at this technology, are in close contact with Anapaya systems as to what the requirements there would be. Obviously, nothing or very little is yet or can yet be communicated as such, but we do know that a growing number of telecommunication companies, especially in Western Europe, are looking at this technology and could then also get into the market for that. I'd like to go on to the next question, which I think I will also hand over to you, Fritz, because it's again a more technical question. It has to do about the implementation, respectively the migration. And the question is this migration, or what is the most time-consuming phase, or what is the most complicated aspect that needs to be looked into when changing from what we have today to SSFN?
I think the most time-consuming, or complex phase is actually procuring the SCIEN connection and setting it up so that everything works, because this is something new and we're not really well acquainted with all the processes and everything there is. I think you need to calculate quite a bit of lead time from the time you actually start looking into it over to the design phase, then ordering the whole stuff, be it connectivity, be it the routers, be it the software, and then making sure that everything works until you get to the actual migration. The actual migration then in itself is very easy and quickly done.
Thank you, Fritz. Next question, which has come in, I think I'd again like to hand it over to you, Fritz. It's got to do with Swift, and I know that you, Fritz, know the Swift technology and how their setup is very well. The question is, has Swift shown any interest in using or supporting SCIEN for its own services?
Apparently, from what I hear, yes, they have shown interest. They have an innovation lab where they're using, or where they're exploring new technologies, and they have looked into it. For those of you who have worked with Swift already for quite some time, you know that Swift intended to provide a SwiftNet network in a similar fashion. And so this is actually a more open approach to how this could look like. They have not really shown interest that much in SSFN yet, but in SCIEN in general, of course. And I'm pretty sure we will stay in touch with them to exchange new ideas, and also they could actually benefit from our experience with that sort of and that type of network.
Thank you for that answer. I'm looking into the Q&A field, and I have a feeling we have answered most questions which have come in. But of course, I'd still like to invite you to ask more questions if they still pop up. Otherwise, what I'd also like to do is also to show you here our contact information in the meantime. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. We've put in here the designated and the dedicated email address specifically for SSFN that will come to Thomas, Fritz, and me. We have also, I'd like to remind you of the website we have created for SSFN, which gives you also information on what SSFN is and how to connect. Also there with the contact details of the service providers for SSFN, i.e. for Anapaya, for Sunrise, for Swisscom, and for Switch. And I'd also like to inform you on the last link which I put in here, which is the magazine Pay, where we have a full article just on SSFN, more also from a technical perspective. Again, here showing you in maybe slightly different words than what we've shown you today, how to connect, what the implications are. I think that also gives you a bit more background information. I see that no more questions have in the meantime come in. So let me take this opportunity to thank you very much for your attendance. Merci beaucoup. Vielen Dank. And as I say, if anything is, please do not hesitate to contact us. Thank you very much for attending here, and goodbye.